Every year we wind up here on Christ the King Sunday, the last day of our church year, the transition to Advent and our season of preparation and hope. And every year we wind up here on Christ the King Sunday. Now, this festival, Christ the King Sunday, is pretty recent in the life of the church. When during our year we tend to do things that are hundreds, if not thousands of years old, this one started only in 1925. 1925, Pope Pius XI looked around at the world that Christians were living in and was concerned. He was worried that people seemed to be more drawn to the secular world and more drawn to the rising currents of nationalism around him than they were to the reign of God. And so in 1925, he looked around and saw they're surrounded by kings and kaisers and czars and duchesses. He was in the midst of all of this ongoing blazing row with the king of Italy over how much power the Pope should have. And in the midst of all of that, also Adolf Hitler came back on the scene. He made his first public appearance after he was released from prison in 1925. And that year also is when he published Mein Kampf, and the Nazi Party was reconstituted that year. So the Pope had some reasons to be concerned. He looked around and saw his people who were being drawn more to define themselves as nation first than by the reign of God. More by politics than by creed. More drawn to the secular kingdoms of the world than by the reign of God. And so he began this festival as a reminder for Christians that we have no king but Christ. And so every year we wind up in this same spot here at the end of the year on Christ the King Sunday. And that's a problem. Because modern day Americans typically have very little lived experience with a dictatorial monarchy. And I'm going to test this. But so how many of you have ever lived under an absolute monarch, a dictatorial monarchy? Okay, we've got one. That's one total for the day, by the way. The reality is we come to Christ the King Sunday without, almost all of us, any lived experience with what it means to have a king. To have someone over us whose job and role and responsibility is to create the laws, to provide and define justice, who provides and defines peace, and who provides for us security, our living, all of the things, and whose word is absolute. We have very little experience with this. And every year we come here to this same place, to Christ the King Sunday, with two questions we need to ask. What does it mean to say we have a king? And what kind of king is this? What does it mean to say Christ is our king? And what kind of king is this? Now, Daniel and Revelation, our first two readings, are no help at all. They are utterly useless for this because they provide us this sort of an ecstatic vision that is intended for people with nowhere left to turn. These are the visions for people when no help is coming, and when calling Jesus our King gets you killed tomorrow, if not this afternoon. These are the visions when no other help is possible that reminds us that God wins in the end. And when you are in that situation, that's all the hope you need. God wins in the end. And so it's pictures of glory and thrones and all of the lights and the singing and stuff like that, but it doesn't tell us what kind of king we are claiming and what it means for us today. Oh, but then there's that John reading. Now that feels familiar, doesn't it? John has the aspects that we can sink our teeth into. We get this kind of reading because this is political theater. This is how we understand power. We're used to this kind of world. We know because that's the kind of world we live in. Two competing parties, Pilate and the temple authorities, making a pact of convenience so they both can break it, manipulating each other and everybody to get what they want, and as long as the other person doesn't get what they want, then we win. It's that competition of power, influence, and control. Oh, we know this, don't we? We're used to this kind of world. This feels like royalty. Pilate wants the Israeli people and the temple authorities humiliated. The temple authorities need Jesus out of the way because the peace that allows them to have power is very, very, very precarious. And a rabble-rouser teaching things like grace and that forgiveness is not just possible but mandatory, and that God is the one that's in control. He's got to go. He's going to teach the people that they can have hope. And when you have hope, you won't put up with this precarious peace that soldiers provide. They need Jesus out of the way. He has to die, but they can't do it. And so both of them seize on to outrage. And that feels pretty familiar too, doesn't it? Using outrage to get our way. Both of them are playing to their bases, manipulating the crowds. Pilate does not care who Jesus is. And Pilate does not care about killing him off. We see this because twice he says, this guy's innocent. And yet at the end of our reading, he was more than happy to have him beaten to within an inch of his life. He is more than happy to have Jesus killed. This is all theater. The temple authorities are stirring up the crowd to get what they need to manipulate Pilate to do what they want. They just need that peace maintained so they can keep their power. This is political theater, nothing more and nothing less. And in the middle of all of this stands Jesus, bound, bruised, his cheek swollen from a vicious slap, putting Pilate on trial, putting the temple authorities on trial, and you and me. Because what Jesus asks here in this theater is the same question he asked Peter way back when he started walking toward Jerusalem. Who do you say that I am? Every year we wind up here, Christ the King Sunday, with those same two questions. What does it mean to claim Christ as our King? And what kind of king is this? That kind. It's that kind of king. Battered, bloodied, bruised, and bound, headed to be executed as a convicted criminal, who will hang between heaven and earth to die for the ones he will be sent again to judge the living and the dead. Who on the cross, trembling as he is dying, will speak words of forgiveness and welcome. That is the kind of king we claim. The kind whose kingdom looks nothing like this world, does it? And what does it mean to claim him as king? What does it mean for us in our lives today to say Jesus is our king? What does it mean for you to say Christ is king? These are the questions for us to take home and wrestle with. So if Christ is our king, what does that mean for our vision of peace that we work for? If Christ is our king, what does that mean for our vision for justice that we seek in the world? If Christ is our king, what does that mean for how we live and behave in the world? If Christ is our king, what does that mean for us as subjects of his reign today and tomorrow and this week? If Christ is our king, if Christ is your king, how does that change life for you?